Ladies and gentlemen watching, welcome to another segment of our NICE podcast. On today's segment, we are here to discuss on the agenda of the Bangladeshi turmoil and the recent power struggle between the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and students of Bangladesh. To give a little bit of context, on 5th of August, former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina resigned Bangladesh and left the country following extensive and violent protests. The unrest began on the month of July with student demonstrations against a government job quota, which later escalated into a broader anti government movement. As protesters stormed her official residence in Dhaka, Hasina was evacuated by a military helicopter to India. Now, the country is being led by interim government under Nobel laureate Professor Yusuf Muhammad, who is the chief advisor. So, Professor S.T. Munisa, so we are really honored and grateful to have you on one of our episodes. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Though our Professor S.T. Muni does not require an introduction, his name itself is enough. But for some formality we will be, giving his a short introduction. We've invited Dr. Professor S.T. Muni, who is the professor emeritus, who is the professor in emeritus Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and he's also a former Indian diplomat. Sir, so I'd like to ask you a few questions regarding the ongoing power struggle in Bangladesh. So could you explain about the recent events in Bangladesh and the underlying reasons behind them?
Well, I think the primary responsibility should lie with Sheikh Hasina, who was the Prime Minister. And there are three aspects of her responsibility which I want to flag. Okay. Number one, she tried to push all the opposition and ran a government which was largely what you call not clearly democratic. Okay. Secondly, the elections which took place did not give her much credibility because opposition did not participate. One opposition, Jamaat-e-Islami, she had banned. The other opposition said we must have an independent election commission because they did not trust Hasina's impartiality and fairness in the elections. So her credibility very low. And she wanted to push the opposition to the wall. That was one reason. Secondly, when students' protest came up, she dealt it with very harshly and used the kind of what you call allegations which were not very fair. For instance, she said that those who are opposing the reservation are all Razakars. Now, Razakar is a term in Bangladesh. It has a very, very ugly meaning in the history of Bangladesh because Razakar were those Bangladeshis who opposed the independence of Bangladesh and supported the Pakistan army in crushing the Bangladesh. Now, most of these students are 25-year-old, 30-year-old. They are not aware of what happened in 71. And to blame all of them like the, dynasties of Razakars was not at all fair. And then she crushed the opposition movement. About 150 people were killed during these students' protests. And thirdly, the opposition took a chance of the students' protest and they joined it very quietly, but very aggressively. And all these factors created almost a chaos in Bangladesh, to which, to some extent, even army added, because army was supposed to control the situation. At the last moment, they went to Hasina and told her that, look, we are not going to fire on our own people, and therefore we don't want to appear to be anti-people force. And therefore we will not be able to protect you, better go. And before going, they told her very clearly she should resign. She was given hardly 45 minutes to leave the country. So if army had not done that, probably she would not go in such a disgrace as it happened. So I think these are the basic factors which led to the chaos and led to the change which has taken place in Bangladesh. There were other forces which we will talk subsequently.
So looking at the current situation in Bangladesh, that now it's been led by the interim government, or which is also known as the caretaker government, by a Nobel laureate, who is now the chief advisor to the interim government. So what do you think will next happen in Bangladesh, and where do you think Bangladesh as a country is heading? Like, which direction do you think the country is now heading?
Look, the Bangladesh is still under chaos and uncertainty, and a lot of violence is going on even after Hasina's leaving. Mohammed Yunus has been appointed, and there are all indications that he has been appointed with clear support from the US and Western powers. And, even before Hasina has ruled for 15 years, after her first term, the Americans and BNP have been asking for an interim government, interim administration to hold elections. And the US has always been asking to form an interim administration under Mohammed Yunus. So they are supporting Mohammed Yunus for almost last 10 years. They have also supported his Grameen Bank project, which is very good, which has gone and done a lot of help to the rural people in Bangladesh. But the American support behind Mohammed Yunus was very clear, and therefore he was accepted. I am not very sure. He may be having political aspirations, but I am not very sure if he has political control over the forces. And the interim government will not be able to stabilize the situation unless there is a support from the army and police. And the police is also revolted. For the last few days, none of the police thanas are with the police officers. They have gone on a strike saying that we have a demands, and unless you meet these demands, we will not operate, we will not do our work. So the anarchy has spread like anything. They have brought in Begum Zia, who was jailed by Hasina, but they have released her. And she is now a political force and would want to influence the government. So there are these different forces. And the way this protest movement has evolved is very scary, because I'll tell you one thing, the way in which they brought Mujibur Rahman's statue down and the way they are hitting at Hindus in Bangladesh clearly show that Jamaat-e-Islami is a dominant force. And Jamaat-e-Islami has Islamic radical forces in them who are anti-Hindu and who are anti-independence of Bangladesh also. So that's why, because Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's statue should have nothing to do with what Hasina has done. That was in 1971, 75. They killed him totally. So that is an indication that quietly, secretly, there are other forces which are, I'm sorry, which are working to destabilize the present Bangladesh. But on the whole, I feel the situation should gradually settle. The army should step in, the police should start working, and somehow it should stabilize. And we hope. But the situation looks very grim. And I am not sure what kind of democracy would emerge in Bangladesh now with the Jamaat-e-Islami, with the extremist forces, with the religious dominance of one type or the other. All the minorities are under threat, and we do not know what will happen and what kind of shape the democracy will take, how soon they can hold elections. And there are no indications that elections are being held very soon, because the government is not even stabilized. They have not even started working, literally.
So, on our recent, okay. So on our recent, promulgation or statement, Sheikh Hasina mentioned she accused the United States for, for removing her from the country. So what do you think about this? Like her accusing the states for her resignation?
Well, the US was constantly against Hasina. She has put a specific blame on the US. That is Saint Martin. There is an island in Bangladesh that Americans wanted to have access to Saint Martin and set up an air base there. I know that US has been asking for a military presence in Bangladesh for many, many years.
Absolutely.
And it was not granted to them. But Hasina's this allegation, since she had made public, it must have some grain of truth. And as we see that the US has not been in favor of Hasina, they have always been supporting BNP, which has old links with the military. And they have probably influence on military. I am told one story, I don't know how far it is correct, but one story is that the Americans asked the army not to support, not to save Hasina. If they do it, they will not be allowed to take UN peacekeeping jobs, which is very lucrative for them when they go. And most of the armies in South Asia, Nepalese, Indians, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, they all go for UN jobs for the sake of money. So they were also not interested, and they put a lot of pressure on army not really to intervene and save Hasina. This is one story, because before, for 10-15 days, army helped the system. After 10-15 days, army did not help the system. And after Hasina's exit, the army was totally in the background. And they said, we will not fire on anyone. And they were not able to control, and the police was also not able to control. I understand that there are some changes which have been brought about in the army now. And there are some changes in the police establishment also. So this is how the changes have taken place. And the Americans cannot be completely out of the picture.
Yes, absolutely, sir. So I totally agree with you. Looking at the work that's being done by the interim government and how the country is handled at the moment by the interim government, what do you think will happen in the future? In the near future, with the country being led by the interim government.
No, in the near future, as I mentioned to you, near future looks chaos, and unless army intervenes, the government cannot be stabilized. And if the government cannot be stabilized, new elections cannot take place. And to what extent they can control these fundamentalist forces which are hitting at the minorities and which are hitting at the democratic forces. They are not only killing minorities, they are also killing and looting Awami League leaders. And Awami League represents the democratic forces in Bangladesh. This is a big problem. Yeah. And immediately you cannot, I don't see much of a peace and stability in Bangladesh. But after a mid-course, I think sense would prevail over them, that everybody cannot live under chaos for a long time. Okay. So somehow the sense would prevail and stability come. And once stability comes, elections will be held. How free and fair they would be remains to be seen. But then a new government would come and perhaps take charge of the situation.
Okay. So in the future, like if we look back at the history from the perspective of the future, like if we move ahead for like 50 years and look back at the history, so do you think the protest that is being laid by the students will be considered a form of revolution in the country, or what do you think so?
No, I think students are a very active force, always have been a very active force in Bangladesh. Even in 71, they were a powerful force in protesting against the Pakistanis. And when the 71 Bangladesh was formed, most of the intellectuals and were killed by the Pakistan army. Most of the businessmen were killed. Most of the democratic leaders were killed. So they are a very potential, powerful force in Bangladesh. And I would add that not only in Bangladesh, the youth is a very potential, powerful force in whole of South Asia. We are a region which a lot of youth people, they have aspirations. The governments are not delivering on them. Everywhere, in Nepal, in India, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, everywhere. Youth are in the forefront. I'm so sorry.
No, sir.
Youth are in the forefront to any change which is coming about. And in Bangladesh, therefore, now you see two of the students' leaders are in the interim government who had led this movement are in the part of the government now. And they will see, when they came to the government, they also said, that we are not going to let the fascist forces take dominance in Bangladesh. We must understand that. The students are for a real good democracy. The students are for a real good governance, not for corruption. You see that in Nepal. I don't have to tell you that. Similarly in India, similarly in other South Asian countries. So the youth will continue to have a very, very prominent role in transformations which South Asia is undergoing. And Bangladesh is no exception to that.
So now that we look around, like we see in the current situation that a lot of countries are being involved. They're taking part, or they sometimes are being alleged. So what do you think, or how do you perceive the roles of global and regional superpower? And how do you specifically position, great superpowers like U.S., India, and China in this context?
See, there are two rivalries going on in South Asia. One is the US and China. The other is India and China. And both these rivalries are affecting all these smaller countries of South Asia. There's no doubt about that. Now, in Bangladesh, the Chinese were not very happy that Hasina was sort of protecting Indian interest and was close to India. Though Hasina tried to have a balance, she also encouraged the Chinese. A lot of investment of the Chinese came there. And she had a last visit to China, which she had to cut short and come. And at that time, China promised something which they did not deliver. So there was some tension between them. All right. But when she came back, she said, we don't care about anybody else. The Indians would help us. So there is some unhappiness on China's part also. The Jamaat-e-Islami is very close to Pakistan. And I will not rule out the role of ISI, the Pakistan's military intelligence agency, and also to some extent the American intelligence agencies, so far as the Jamaat-e-Islami is concerned. And America I have already talked about. So America would not like to see the Chinese influence at all there. And they want a foothold in the Bay of Bengal because they think India alone cannot face the Chinese. And they want their own presence there everywhere. They want a presence in Nepal. They want a presence in Bangladesh. They want a presence in Sri Lanka. Everywhere they want to be present. So these two rivalries from outside, and Pakistan would, through Jamaat-e-Islami, would want to have a Bangladesh which is more friendly to them. So these are the three forces acting in Bangladesh. And how these rivalries will shape is very difficult to say. I think it may gradually intensify this rivalry, and that may not be very good for Bangladesh. That may not be very good for the whole region, I would say.
Okay. Yes, I definitely agree with your perspective, and I think we all can relate with, the way you presented your answer and your facts. As we move to the end of the segment, I'd like to ask you a similar question that was addressed to former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina on September 2022. Like when Sri Lanka was in a similar position. Like we have seen similar situations and similar cases in countries like Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. So do you think these situations might overspread in different South Asian nations, or like in nations in Asia? What is your perspective, sir?
That's what I told you, that the students are in the forefront. You have not named India. In India, students are very unhappy on the question of, NEET examinations, paper leaks, not jobs being given to them. There is a lot of restlessness. And it is there equally in other countries. Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, you have mentioned. It is equally true in Pakistan. They are mostly supporting Imran Khan and not the government. So you have these, manifestations of the students' power or the manifestations of the youth power. It's almost everywhere there. Unfortunately, some youth are fundamentalist also. which is a negative influence. And they believe in a lot of violence and destruction, which is unfortunate, but somehow they need to be controlled. While other students want a change which is more positive. But the governments in all these countries are incapable of delivering the aspirations of these young people. And this is a lot of gap between what they get and what they aspire. And I think this gap will continue. It's not easy to bridge unless the governments become very good in their governance, unless the governments become very honest and efficient in their governance, which there are not much indications to see that that will happen. But we all hope that it will inject a sense in the governments. I think everywhere else, even in India, I mean, the government wanted to have opposition Mukt Bharat, which is not going to deliver good things to them. Somehow, the last election in India has resisted that tendency through the vote. And I hope this kind of activity takes place in other countries also, where the ballot decides rather than the bullet. And I think that is more important for us. The situation is prompting us to think deeply and prompting us to act fast and act more efficiently. Leave it to the governments if they can do that.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your invaluable insights. We hope the best happens for Bangladesh and many other nations. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being so generous, with your thoughts and your invaluable insights. In fact, it has been such a great pleasure of mine to have you and to interview you. Thank you so much, sir.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.